5 Russians are killed after a helicopter is shot down by rebels in northern Syria. Moscow says the aircraft was on a humanitarian mission. The so-called IS group says it was responsible. We'll be getting the latest from our security correspondent. Also this lunchtime, Theresa May says she won't intervene in David Cameron's resignation honours list amid claims of cronyism. A 12-year-old boy and 3 teenagers are charged with murder after the death of a man assaulted outside a McDonald's in Manchester. The chances of surviving for at least a decade are twice as high as they were in the 1970s from cancer, but a charity warns of the downsides. Trouble for Trump. The mother of a dead US Muslim soldier hits back after the presidential candidate questioned her silence during a speech by her husband. And back in his pen, the Dartmoor Lynx is recaptured after 3 weeks on the prowl.
In the south, rural crime. New figures shed light on the millions of pounds being lost as thieves target the region's farmers. And exasperated drivers speak out as roadworks are blamed for traffic misery in Berkshire.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. A Russian helicopter has been shot down in Syria, killing all 5 members of the military who were on board. The Defence Ministry said the crew were returning to their base after delivering humanitarian aid to the city of Aleppo. It's not clear which group brought the helicopter down. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner reports.
Shot down over Syria's Idlib province, this rebel footage shows the remains of a Russian helicopter. Moscow says all 5 of those on board were killed, 3 crew and 2 officers, after it said they were delivering aid to Aleppo. For those still trapped in that northern Syrian city, the agony continues. Pro-government forces have been pushing back a rebel advance that began last night. The rebels are trying to break the government's siege around the city. But Syrian troops, backed by Russian airstrikes, appear determined to retake the whole of Aleppo. For its 250,000 inhabitants, the humanitarian situation gets ever worse.
Can we consider displacing people from their homes is a humanitarian thing? Of course, people could run away of Aleppo before besieging it, but they decided to stay because this is their home, this is their land. They want to stay here.
The Syrian government says it's opened corridors of free passage for civilians trying to flee the fighting, and for any rebels prepared to surrender. But so far, only a trickle of people have taken up the offer, and a British surgeon who's been working with local doctors accuses the regime of targeting hospitals.
In 2012, the Assad regime actually passed a law to say that it was legitimate to target hospitals, to target doctors, to target civilians, in fact to target anybody that wasn't involved positively with the regime side. So they've made it legal to actually bomb hospitals.
Amongst the latest victims of Syria's endless civil war, Qusay Abtini, a 14-year-old child star of a local sitcom set in the ruins of Aleppo. He was killed by a missile as he tried to flee the city that once was home.
Well, Frank Gardner is here with me now. The downing of a Russian helicopter, there will be concerns about what sort of reaction, some sort of retaliation perhaps.
Yes, I mean, the Russians tend to retaliate pretty forcefully for something like this. They'll want to know exactly which rebel faction it is. Almost certainly they will retaliate with airstrikes. I think the bigger picture is that it makes it even harder to find the peace that Syria desperately needs. There is a 3rd round of UN-sponsored peace talks that are supposed to kick off at the end of August, but there are fundamentally here 2 opposing blocs that it's very hard to see how you bring them together, because the Syrian regime thinks that it can hang on, backed by the Russians. They're massively fortified now by the Russian military support. They want to retake the whole of Aleppo and ultimately retake the whole of Syria. But the rebels are trying to break out of the siege that's surrounding them, and they are determined to fight on until President Assad goes. These 2 are not compatible, these 2 aims. So I'm afraid the fighting is going to go on.
Frank, thank you very much. Frank Gardner. The Prime Minister's spokesperson says Theresa May will not intervene in the row over David Cameron's resignation honours list because it would set a very bad precedent. Mr Cameron has been accused of cronyism after a leaked document suggested he'd requested honours for his political friends, former staff and Conservative Party donors. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Eleanor Garnier. Why would the Prime Minister be expected to, in any way, intervene anyway?
It does sound a little bit confusing, but actually it is only Prime Ministers who are in office who can make honours recommendations to the Queen. And that means that technically it will be Theresa May putting forward David Cameron's honours list to be confirmed. Downing Street saying this lunchtime that, as you say, it would set a very bad precedent for the new Prime Minister to start interfering in this official process. And this process involves the Prime Minister drawing up a list of names. They then get vetted and checked by special committees before going all the way up to the Queen. I think that this honours lists always draw criticism and controversy. Perhaps this one has added potency because before David Cameron became Prime Minister, he talked about bringing in a new kind of politics. And the criticism is it's that sentiment that now sounds a little bit hollow. Now, this leaked list in the Sunday Times is suggesting there are names from former Tory donors to pro-EU campaigners and a number of Downing Street staff, including press aides and advisors. But Downing Street and other sources are telling us, well, actually, look at that list. Some of it might be correct, but there are reports that 4 cabinet ministers, pro-EU cabinet ministers, are due to be knighted, and sources are telling us that that is not the case.
Eleanor, thank you very much. Eleanor Garnier. If you're diagnosed with cancer now, your chances of surviving for at least a decade are twice as high as they were in the 1970s. 170,000 people in the UK who were diagnosed with cancer up to 40 years ago are still alive. But according to a report by Macmillan Cancer Support, there is a downside. Many cancer survivors are suffering long-term physical, mental and financial side effects. This report from Smitha Mundasat.
Cancer in the 1970s.
The other form of treatment is known as chemotherapy.
Back then, there were fewer drugs and ways of spotting the disease. Many saw it as a death sentence. But the charity Macmillan Cancer Support says remarkably thousands of people diagnosed decades ago are still alive today.
There are amazing differences between treatment nowadays and the treatment, say, 30 years ago. Not only are there differences in treatment, but screening technologies have advanced so that we're getting cancers at a very early stage. And if they're caught early, for the most part, cancer survival is better than when caught late.
And with better treatment and quicker diagnosis, more people are surviving. It estimates people are now twice as likely to live at least another 10 years after being diagnosed with cancer than they were at the start of the 1970s. More than 170,000 people in the UK diagnosed with cancer in the 70s and 80s are still alive. But many are facing poor health or disability from their treatment.
I get swollen fingers, swollen feet, ankles, sleeplessness, insomnia, panic attacks. And it's not just the physical aspects, there's also the emotional aspects, there are the financial implications. I ended up with a bad credit record because I wasn't able to keep up payments on, for example, my credit cards when I was out of work.
Cancer may no longer be life-ending, but it is life-changing, with thousands living with the side effects of therapy, the psychological impact and financial worries for many years.
Currently 625,000 people living with depression right now after treatment, and that is because of the major consequences on them physically, in terms of the side effects on them, their familial lives, social lives, etc. All those have a major contribution to their well-being.
To keep up, Macmillan says it has expanded to even include benefits advisors and help with research. It says NHS services need to grow too, to make sure people surviving cancer live not just long, but healthy lives. Smitha Mundasad, BBC News.
A 12-year-old boy and 3 teenagers have been charged with murdering a man who was assaulted in Greater Manchester last week. All 4 are due to appear in court this afternoon. Let's go to our correspondent Seema Katecha, who's in Manchester for us. Seema.
Yes, the 4 suspects appeared at Oldham Magistrates Court around 11 o'clock this morning. They were led into the court, handcuffed to police officers, and they were each asked individually to confirm their name, their address and their age. It was a very brief court appearance. It only lasted a matter of minutes, and then they were led out again. And as they were led out, the youngest suspect, just 12 years old, blew a kiss to his mother in the gallery. The other suspects, aged 16, 16 and 17. All their parents were there. Some of them wept as they were led out. Now, this all stems from what happened last Wednesday, just before 11 o'clock in the evening. A man was attacked at a McDonald's, outside a McDonald's in Ashford. The police came, they found the injured man. He was taken to hospital, and in the early hours of Thursday morning, he was pronounced dead. We do know the identity of the victim now, a man called Bradley Moore. The case now moves to the court behind me, Manchester Crown Court. The boys will appear in around an hour's time, where we are likely to have a decision on whether they will be remanded in custody.
Seema Kotecha, thank you very much. Police in Brazil have freed the mother-in-law of the billionaire Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone, who was kidnapped from her home in Sao Paulo on July the 22nd. 2 men have been arrested, and officers say no ransom was paid. Pregnant women are being advised by Public Health England to consider postponing non-essential trips to the US state of Florida amid concerns over the Zika virus. Its travel advice was updated after Florida confirmed 4 cases of the virus transmitted by local mosquitoes. Well, Gary O'Donoghue is in Miami, and Florida, traditionally a huge destination for many UK tourists.
Yeah, something like 106 million tourists come here each year, and of those, about 1.5 million are British. At any one time, you're looking at around 50,000 Brits in this part of southern Florida, and then further north around the theme parks in Orlando. Now, we know that the main risk of Zika is to pregnant women or to women considering becoming pregnant, and the Foreign Office has said that they should consider postponing any non-essential travel to here. I caught up with a couple of British tourists, Hannah and Elizabeth, and Hannah told me that her mother was so worried that she'd texted her at 4 a.m. when she found out the news.
Well, I had a little Google after the mum message, and I know that they're now obviously concerned enough to do full refunds for pregnant women that have planned to come over to Florida. So that's obviously pretty serious.
Yeah. And they've said maybe not to have children for 6 months if you've been to an area with confirmed Zika,
No
which
naughty
is fine.
sex.
Which is fine for us.
Yeah.
Now, the authorities are continuing to spray this 1 mile square affected area north of downtown Miami. They're going door to door, giving out packs to people, doing some testing, clearing out that standing water, which is where the big risk is from the mosquito. But they do, Simon, they do say that they are expecting more cases to come.
Gary O'Donoghue in Miami, thank you very much. It's coming up to 1:15, our top story this lunchtime. 5 Russians are killed after a helicopter is shot down by rebels in northern Syria. Moscow says it was on a humanitarian mission.
And coming up, I'm here in Belo Horizonte in Brazil, where Team GB's athletes are getting ready for Rio.
In South today, targeted by thieves, the valuable items being stolen from farmers in the south to the tune of millions of pounds. And banging the drum for Swanage, we get a taste of the town's famous carnival.
The mother of a dead American Muslim soldier has criticised Donald Trump for suggesting that her husband stopped her from speaking at the Democratic National Convention last week. Ghazala and Kazia Khan's 27-year-old son was killed by a car bomb in Iraq in 2004. The couple stood together on stage at the convention on Thursday, while Mr. Khan challenged Donald Trump's attitude to minority groups. Our correspondent Daniela Relf reports.
Donald Trump and Ghazala Khan. Could this be the row that really damages the Trump presidential campaign? He questioned her silence. She says he is ignorant. A comforting arm around his wife at the Democratic convention. The words of this father made a powerful impact.
Have you even read the United States Constitution? I will gladly lend you my copy. You have sacrificed nothing.
In a television interview, Donald Trump's response to the criticism of him was typically direct.
If you look at his wife, she was standing there. She had nothing to say. Maybe she wasn't allowed to have anything to say. You tell me.
How would you answer that, Father? What sacrifice have you made for your country?
I think I've made a lot of sacrifices. I work very, very hard. I've created thousands and thousands of jobs, tens of thousands of jobs, built great structures. I've had tremendous success. I think
those
I've
are
done a lot.
sacrifices?
Oh, sure. I think they're sacrifices.
Ghazala Khan says she was not forced to be silent. She was a grieving mother, overwhelmed, struggling to stay composed.
When I was standing there, all America felt my pain without saying a single word. Every person with a kind heart felt it. Please, Mr. Trump, feel that pain and you will be better with understanding me. If you are in the pain, you fight or you don't say anything. I am not a fighter. I can't fight.
This latest exchange has just added heat to a campaign that is already bitter and personal.
He's already demonstrated, and does so every day, that he is temperamentally unfit and unqualified to be President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief. And the latest attacks on the Khan family, on General Allen, just reinforces the doubts that any American should have.
Good morning, America. New trouble for Donald Trump, a GOP nominee in an escalating war of words with a Muslim family of a fallen U.S. soldier.
The morning headlines in America. Donald Trump has since described Ghazala Khan's son, Humayun, as a hero, but there's been no apology, even as he faces growing criticism from within the Republican Party. Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
Here, 5 supermarkets have been told to take thousands of pots of yoghurt off their shelves. It's because of fears they may contain rubber. The products are made by Yo Valley, but mostly sold with own brand labels at Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda, the Co-op and Waitrose. An Australian family living in the Highlands face deportation from midnight tonight unless they can secure an extension to their stay in the UK. Catherine and Greg Brain and their 7-year-old son moved to Scotland in 2011 on Mr. Brain's student visa, but the terms of their stay were later changed. Muhyiddin Mira, who tried to behead a musician during an Islamic State-inspired rampage at Leytonstone Tube Station in London, has been sentenced at the Old Bailey to life imprisonment with a minimum of 8.5 years. Our correspondent Andy Moore was in court and joins us now. Andy.
In essence, this hearing today was, in layman's terms, an attempt to decide whether Muhyiddin Mira was mad or bad or a combination of both. The judge said he accepted that Mira was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, an undiagnosed illness at the time, but he also said he bore significant responsibility for what happened, that it was an attempt to kill innocent members of public in plain sight. So he did sentence him to life imprisonment, but he will start that sentence at the Broadmoor Top Security Psychiatric Unit. As he rampaged around a London tube station with a bread knife, Mira claimed he was acting for his brothers in Syria. The man Mira tried to behead, musician Lyle Zimmerman, said he wouldn't let the incident ruin his life.
Being attacked from behind, I didn't really even get a good look at my assailant. He punched me to the ground and then kicked me in the head very hard until I lost consciousness. Among the many ways that I was preposterously lucky was the fact that there was an off-duty GP on the next train car who very bravely came down and helped the other passersby who were looking after me, even when my assailant was still wandering around the station.
The Old Bailey had already heard from a psychiatrist that Mira was clearly mentally ill at the time of the attack and still posed a very severe risk to the public. He had a history of psychosis. He thought he was being persecuted for his faith and stalked by the security services.
You ain't no Muslim, bruv.
Mira was tasered several times before eventually being brought under control. He had images of the murdered soldier Lee Rigby on his mobile phone, but there was no evidence he'd been in direct contact with anyone from so-called Islamic State. The police said he was typical of the sort of vulnerable person that terrorist organisations could exploit for their own purposes. And Judge Hilliard paid tribute to the many passers-by who tried to help Lyle Zimmerman. He said it was fortunate, really, that Muhyiddin Mira's blade, his bread knife, actually broke during that attack. He said if it hadn't broken, it's hard to see how Mr. Zimmerman could have survived.
Andy Moore at the Old Bailey, thank you very much. A rogue trader who was jailed in 2012 for Britain's biggest banking fraud has said the industry is still riven by conflicts of interest and traders are under pressure to make profits no matter what. Kwaku Adeboli, who lost £1.5 billion while working for the Swiss bank UBS, also said the type of crimes that he'd committed could happen again. Well, Kwaku was speaking to our economics editor Kamal Ahmed, who's with me now. So, who is he? What did he do?
Well, Kwaku, he was a young man in his 20s who joined UBS, the big Swiss bank, and he was a successful trader for quite a while. But then when the economy started to turn sour, 2011, 2012, the European crisis, a lot of his big bets on the market actually started to go in the wrong direction. He lost lots of money. He tried to hide those losses by setting up fictitious trades and trying to hide the fact that he'd lost so much money from his bosses. But when I spoke to him, he did seem to show, 4 years on from his trial, some genuine remorse.
I have apologized and I will continue apologizing. I am devastated, not for myself, but for my institution and the people I worked with. The very first thing I did when I was first arrested was say, I am sorry beyond words. I said it through my lawyers, but that is what I said. During my trial, I said I was sorry repeatedly. And these are not just devices, it's how I feel. I failed, I made mistakes.
Do you think that the culture that you found yourself in has changed now and that it couldn't happen again?
Unfortunately, I have to say that the conversations I've had with people in the industry over the last year, through the conferences I've spoken at, the seminars I've been involved in, everyone, the young traders, the senior executives, everyone in the industry is still looking for a way to change culture within the industry. We still have so much work to do to get the finance industry in a position where it's trusted by society, that it's contributing something consistently that helps society move forward in a positive way.
Has behaviour changed in banking enough?
No, absolutely not. I think the young people I've spoken to, former colleagues I've spoken to, are still struggling with the same issues, the same conflicts, the same pressures to achieve no matter what.
And we know where conflict goes.
Where the conflict comes is where people fall into this grey zone. And so I think it can absolutely happen again, especially as we go into what could possibly be the next phase of the great financial crisis over the next sort of 12 to 18 to 24 months.
And looking back now, do you think of yourself as a criminal?
I don't think I'm a criminal. It's a label that I have. You made a terrible mistake. You made a sequence of terrible choices, but your intentions were always in the right place. I accept that I was found guilty of a crime that had dishonesty central to it.
You were called a liar in the trial.
I was called a liar, and I accept that I lied.
Kwaku Adeboli there. I think the big question is, has culture changed since 2012 when he was found guilty? Yes, there are lots more compliance officers. Yes, there is lots more regulation in banking. But at its most simple, banking is a mixture of money, profit, and risk. And that still to this day can be a very toxic combination.
Kamal, thank you very much. Kamal Ahmed. A lynx that escaped from Dartmoor Zoo is back in his pen after more than 3 weeks on the run. The Carpathian lynx was found after walking into a trap which had meat in it. Zoo owners now hope to make future escapes less likely. They want to find him a mate, and they've also put a roof on his enclosure. From Dartmoor, Nick Qureshi reports.
Britain's most famous runaway cat is a little more calm today after his 3-week adventure. The zoo owner received a text in the early hours of Saturday saying simply, "We have him."
I was absolutely elated when we got the news. I mean, I just questioned, is it a picture or is it him? And when it was him, I just couldn't believe it. It's such an unexpected early bonus and like a huge weight off my shoulders as well.
Flaviu staged his Houdini act on the 7th of July when he chewed his way out of this wooden house, having only arrived the day before. Flaviu's antics came to an end at Hemerdon, around a mile away from the zoo. Just as well, say zookeepers. He was adapting to freedom and learning to hunt. Flaviu had already killed 5 lambs on Devon farmland. He was caught in this trap when veal was used to replace one of those dead carcasses.
Yeah, well, cats go back to the scene quite often just to obviously fill up again, to have another feed. They've done a lot of effort to catch it and they're lazy, so they go back to have another feed and on the carcass that they've left. So we rely on that fact to catch him.
This 2-year-old lynx is now in the zoo's cheetah exhibit while his own enclosure is strengthened. Oh, and because he's somewhat grumpy, the zoo is hoping to find a girlfriend for him. Nick Qureshi, BBC News, Dartmoor.
Now, with only 4 days to go until the 31st Olympiad, it seems even the greatest show on earth isn't untouched by domestic politics. The suspended Brazilian president, Dilma Rousseff, says she will not attend the opening ceremony of the Games because she doesn't play second fiddle to the interim leader. Well, our correspondent, Wera Davis, is in Rio for us, and egos once again.
Well, Brazil, when it was awarded these Olympics back in 2009, was a much happier and more stable country. The reality is now is that we're in the middle of an economic and political crisis. The elected president, Dilma Rousseff, has been suspended pending an impeachment trial, and as you say, she will not now be at the opening ceremony. She's taken it very personally, and she's been speaking to the BBC.
O sistema político está corroído, não só.
Brazil's political system is corroded, with 35 fragmented parties with no clear platform and created purely for horse trading. We need to recreate our political and electoral system.
Eu conto em voltar à presidência da República.
I count on going back to the presidency, and I will be remembered not only as the first female president of Brazil, but also the one who defeated a coup and restored democracy in my country.
Well, like any big event, the Olympics here in Brazil have been dogged by procedural problems along the way, but the organisers at Rio 2016 say they are ready. Plenty of events taking place along Copacabana Beach here, down at the Olympic Park and also at the main athletic stadium. The main opening ceremony is now only 4 days away on Friday, and the teams are starting to arrive. Back to
Wera, thank you very much. Wera Davis. Well, away from the politics, Team GB are settling into their training camp in Belo Horizonte. And there are 2 new teams this year. Rugby Sevens is making its debut in the Games, and Great Britain has a men's and women's team, both ranked 4th. Our sports correspondent, Andy Swiss, is at the training camp. Andy.
Yes, Simon, welcome to Belo Horizonte. As you say, the new sport of rugby sevens will be getting a lot of attention at these games. Let's talk to the captain of the women's team, Emily Scarrett. Emily, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, your first match is on Saturday. Just give us a sense of how excited you are to be part of all this.
Oh, we're so excited. Obviously, it's the first time that any of us have ever been at an Olympic Games, and we're just trying to soak it up as much as possible, but kind of trying to retain a little bit of focus on what it is we've got to do as well. We're already here in Belo in the holding camp, and we're around some of the swimmers, and the athletes arrived the other day. So household names are already, all around us, which is hugely inspiring.
Now, I guess a lot of people will perhaps be more familiar with 15-a-side rugby rather than 7-a-side. Just give us a sense of what they can expect. It's very different, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's fast-paced. It's exciting. There's tries all the time. Often underdogs can win. The games obviously don't last very long, so one try really can make all the difference. And the crowd really gets behind it because of the short time that the games are played over. The atmosphere and the environment is fantastic.
Now, both the men's and the women's team have qualified, and you've got real medal prospects, haven't you? Just how confident are you feeling?
Yeah, we've obviously come here with huge aspirations. We know that if we put in performances that we know we can, then we can really come away with something. But we're also aware that every other team, or a large proportion of the teams, are thinking the same thing. That's the nature of sevens, and it's been shown throughout the World Series all this year. So yeah, we're just looking to put some consistent performances together, and hopefully that will put us in a good place.
And you were part of the England team that won the World Cup a couple of years ago. Just how good would it be to win an Olympic medal to go with that?
Yeah, it'd be pretty special, wouldn't it? You know, the Olympic Games is the biggest sporting stage that there is, and to be here for one is unbelievable, but to go out there and play and hopefully come away with something for our country would be, yeah, it'd be unbelievable.
Well, Emily, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So there we have it, not long to go now for Team GB's athletes, with the opening ceremony just 4 days away, Simon.
Andy Swiss, thank you very much. Well, let's have a look at the weather, and Phil Avery is here with us now. Phil.
Simon, thanks very much. Very good afternoon to you. Before the uncertainty of August, let me take you back to July. This rainfall graphic shows that many parts of England and Wales had rainfall well below what we would expect for the time of year. 1 or 2 wetter spots you'll notice further north. Even further back into June, what a contrast, a complete 180 almost. Very much wetter in the south, much drier conditions further north. Now back into July, all of us have changed the month, and some of those dry areas of July, you've really changed your weather on the change of the month, simply because of this great veil of cloud piling in from the Atlantic, robbing some of early sunshine, certainly, but certainly delivering rainfall into those July dry areas. And that's been the way of it across Wales and the southwest of England. Some really quite heavy rain here. Further north, different story altogether. It's officially a bank holiday. You might not have the day off, but it is a bank holiday. There's a scattering of showers there, but there's some glorious sunshine to be had as well. Northern Ireland, essentially dry, although it gets a bit wetter down towards the border. Yorkshire Day in, funny old thing, Yorkshire, but dry here if you're celebrating. But generally speaking, the further south and west you come, this is where we start picking up on all of that cloud and rain. And my word, there is some rain to be had. Before this is over, we could be seeing 30 to 40 millimetres on some of the higher ground of South Wales and the moors and the tors. And overnight, that rain continues its journey ever further eastwards. Muggy fair here across the southern parts, never lower than 15, 16 or 17. By complete contrast, underneath those clear skies in parts of Scotland, well down into single figures. So here we go for Tuesday. And again, it is something of a north-south split. The best of the sunshine across the northeastern quarter of Scotland. Yes, there's some rain coming into Northern Ireland, eventually southwestern Scotland. All the while in the south, a lot of cloud, mist and murk, and some rain and drizzle on the western hills and slopes of Wales and the southwest. But some sunshine even here if you can get into the shelter of the lee of the high ground. And then into the middle part of the week, it's that low pressure that really drives things. Notice the number of isobars, windy fair, certainly on the higher ground of Scotland and Northern Ireland at times, and some pretty hefty showers as well. Generally speaking, the further south you are, somewhat drier conditions pervade. So this rather misfiring summer of ours continues apace through the coming week. It'll be wet at times, as you see. There will be some sunshine, but the temperatures barely warrant a postcard home. If you want more detail, of course, it's there at the BBC weather website. Simon.
Phil, thank you very much. Reminder of our top stories this lunchtime. 5 Russians are killed after a helicopter is shot down by rebels in northern Syria. Moscow says it was on a humanitarian mission. Muhyiddin Mira, who tried to behead a musician during an Islamic State-inspired attack, has been sentenced at the Old Bailey to life imprisonment. That's all from us now on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. From me, good afternoon.